Good afternoon, Brian.
Good afternoon, Joe. Are you staying cool out there?
Well, your air conditioning's not fixed yet, right?
No.
Oh gosh, yeah, ours is fine. But it's 85 right now outside, from what I can see. So, if you're watching this 3 months from now and it's winter, you can tell us to be quiet. Uh, but right now it's September, and we're going into a week where of 90 plus degree weather, which is unseasonably warm. And Brian's air conditioning went out a few weeks ago and won't be repaired
For
uh,
about
another week. About time for the temperature to come back down.
opening things up, closing them up, you get used to it. But yeah,
Yeah,
no, yeah. And your son is back to high school, and ours is going to go to college in a couple weeks.
yeah,
It, time of transition.
yeah. This is when we take those deep meditative breaths in through the nose, out through the mouth. Oh gosh, the world, things are changing. Oh, stop.
Saw a thing the other day and I totally agree, and I have felt this way most of my life. Is like that September feels like the start of the year. It's the new year. Everything changes and new, and not January. January is just a date, right? It's just everything is new or ending in September. This is the start of the year, so I get it. I don't know if you've ever felt that way, but it has felt that way for most of my life.
Well, because most of your life you've either been in school or you've had kids who have been in school, right?
And that's the start of the year.
Right? And then your kids will finish school and probably get married and have grandkids for you. And then you'll start to count your days and your years according to when school starts. I think that's a big piece of it, but I agree with you.
Yeah. I guess before that school routine was in, it's like it's the turn into, okay, the year is going to get, the light is getting greater. It's like we've gone through the worst part of the year. Now it's on the upswing again.
Yeah.
Okay,
Except I don't believe that.
whatever.
No,
Yeah.
no, no. I mean, what I mean is, if we get through Christmas, we'll get back on track here in a moment. We get through Christmas, and then we go, okay, cool. All right, we're gonna get out of winter here. And then I stop and go, no, no, winter's only been going for 9, 10 days.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Winter's not over till March.
yeah. So that's where I go, oh, we're not on an upswing yet. I mean, you're starting to get some more light, a little more light every day. You get
Right.
closer to
But
spring, but there's definitely I'm going. Okay, there we got this slog. Let's get there.
yeah, January and February. Yeah. Got to get through those 2 months, and then, okay, now we're starting to get better. Yeah. I agree. Yeah. Yeah.
All right, we've got some good stuff to talk about.
Okay.
Returning back to the political gospel, the book that we've been going through. We took a couple weeks off. Our schedules didn't quite mesh, so we appreciate your patience with that. We're getting into a part of the book that I think Brian and I both agree there's some good, tangible information coming our way, some guidance. And I'm going to kick it over to you to talk about basically how we are called to respond or not respond.
Just some basic framework ideas to help remind us what we're talking about and such. And he has this little chart, and it's like what I like about it is to help just summarize some of the things that I thought, and it's the purpose of the government and how we should be responding. It says there's one section where it's like, okay, when the government has stopped ordering society, establishing justice, rewarding and promoting good, and providing stability. First of all, that's what government, we need to remember. This is what government, biblically speaking, is supposed to do: order, justice, promoting some stability and good. Okay, yeah. And when it steps out of that, that's when there's problems. When it does things like when it's promoting sin, when it's trying to order and promote stuff that's not just. then we start having problems. And when it's just this guy is he's suggesting when it's just not ordering society or promoting those things, then what we need to do is try and reform it. And that's yes, so let's say there's policy of the United States that's like, okay, that's not as just as it could be, but we could do stuff to help make it better. No problem. But then the other side of it is, but when it's actually actively promoting sin, when its commands are immoral, that it is telling us to do something beyond what it's to do, then our job, in his view, is to either disobey or to protest. Okay, does that make sense to you? Did that make all sense to you?
Yeah, yeah, I'm tracking with it. So he breaks it down, and I think we're both looking at our books. The two categories we have: governmental violation or neglect, and then governmental infringement. So the violation or neglect is they're not necessarily doing their jobs in the way that we would like them to, but it's not an infringement on morality, or it's not calling us into sin. Whereas governmental infringement crosses that line into something that is clearly leading toward sin, or could involve
Right.
sin.
And he puts it in two sentences later that I think is really helpful. Yeah, the government's job is to promote justice, order, virtue, and peace. And when it does something where it tells us we must do something that is breaking what God tells us to do, then when it tells us basically to sin, such as worship Nero, for example,
Mm-hmm.
Then our job is more than just reform, because you can't even go along with that. You have to actively oppose it, either through protest or through just straight up disobedience.
Yeah,
So I think that's helpful.
it calls to mind. I think it's Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Yeah,
You know,
right. So the government that they were in was not very godly in any way, but when they actively were told, when they're bluntly told they had to worship another god, they're like, well, we just simply can't.
right?
Right. You just can't do it. And I think, and then he goes on, he ends up saying, okay, there's some straight lines here and there's some jagged lines. And the straight lines is like, it's sometimes it's pretty clear on what's moral in a circumstance, but it gets a lot more complicated when in terms of how do you actually have that as public policy, and how are we supposed to respond to that? That gets really complicated, which, as we both said, just a little bit of brief talking about this, was a lot of this is just let's just put the pause button on and think carefully about what is the government saying and how are we supposed to respond.
Sorry, one of my big takeaways, and he didn't necessarily call this out, is there are far fewer solid lines than jagged lines. I think most of what we encounter today are jagged lines. However, they are presented to us in absolutes, as if there's no gray area. It is either absolutely this or absolutely that. And in the partisan politics of today, that's the game, right? To keep us divided, to keep. So anyway, if you kind of take a step back and go, is this a jagged line, or is this? I can't remember what the other one was. Solid line,
Straight line.
straight line.
And yeah, it makes sense. I mean, we want to think there's a lot of straight lines, just setting aside politics, just moral, ethical in terms of our lives, like thou shalt not murder, or thou shalt not lie. Okay, these are clear, right? Yeah, but when is it lying and when is it manipulation? It's like, okay, that gets a lot more complicated. We don't like messy, complicated moral questions because it is complicated. And then you add politics in and
Right.
public policy.
I,
Now
I,
that's harder.
I wanted to share something with you that's adjacent to this, but it's an example of how that you've got different forces that are trying to confuse straight lines versus jagged lines. There's a movie that just came out called Reagan,
Right.
and a biopic about Ronald Reagan.
Right. I've read the
And
trailer, but I don't know anything about it.
well, I didn't either. But one of my friends shared this post that said Facebook is suppressing promotion of the movie Reagan, so let's make sure not to share this, as a way to say, in quotes, not share it. But it was shared with me on Facebook. So, first of all, like, well, clearly there isn't anything that's preventing you from promoting this on Facebook because you just did. But a lot of my conservative friends were up in arms about this Facebook suppressing the promotion of this movie. And so they were sharing this all over the place. And as such, the movie that has been kind of parked for a few years because the studio thought it was a dud, they harnessed the outrage of their opinion being suppressed to get people to share that. And it's,
And I'll even go so far as to give the people the credit of the people who are sharing it believe that.
oh, yeah, no, 100%.
Yeah. Yeah. Truth is so elusive. You know, I sound like Pilate. What is truth?
Well, yeah. My
It gets
first
hard.
my first response to outrage is not to respond. It's like, oh, people are freaking out over this. But which people are freaking out? Is it everybody who's freaking out? Or is it just one group who's freaking out? Because if it's one group, my guess is there's some manipulation involved.
You always have to, and again, this is the whole pause button. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, maybe it's worth being upset over. Maybe,
Yeah.
maybe, but is it? Is it really? Is the assumptions true? Is what's happening that they're upset about actually happening? I mean, like I saw a thing the other day that said that Disney World was now making it so that when you get your tickets, you could only go to 4 free rides, and then the rest you had to pay per ride.
Yeah.
My immediate thought was like, "Are you kidding me? That's crazy. They're money grubbers." It wasn't true.
Right.
It wasn't true, right? I don't even think it was ever true, but and that's part of the problem with this, especially. It's hard. The hard part is because things do get suppressed. People do lie.
Yeah.
Um, both sides do lie, and it's like it becomes very difficult for us, and it takes a lot of effort for us to know what's really happening,
Right.
and we don't.
And that's a big deal because that's the precursor to the determination of a straight line versus a jagged line. There's an assumption there that you have access to the truth. Now, because otherwise, is it true or is it manipulation? What's going on? And because people are, this isn't the 60s or 50s and we're not being handed truth on a platter. It's imperative for us, before we respond, before we decide jagged versus straight line, that we should do some due diligence to understand what the truth is.
Because if the facts that you have are true, that you're given are actually real and true, then maybe it is a straight moral line. But the facts that you're given may not be.
Right.
And then even if it's a straight moral line, as he puts it, that doesn't mean you have a clear way that what should be the public policy
Right.
and how we should respond to that. That gets I mean, a classic one is the whole death penalty thing.
Oh yeah, we talked about that on well, something similar to that on Sunday morning.
Right. I mean, murder's wrong. Okay, sure. Yeah, but is when the state executes someone, is that murder? Okay, that's a slightly different question. And yeah, so public policy gets complicated. Should we harbor should we take care of illegal aliens? Well, there's a distinction in my mind between what I might promote on a public policy plate in terms of how I'm going to relate on an individual basis. If somebody comes into our congregation who's not here illegally, I don't care.
Mm-hmm.
My job is to love them and tell them about Jesus.
Right.
That means, you know, that's a separate question. So it's really complicated. We have to really pause.
Yeah. And that's the thing, is that first sifting of understanding truth should be a natural pause point. And, so we're as we come back to this, our first response shouldn't be a knee-jerk reaction based on our emotions or political partisan inclination. It should be
the thing for you.
Yeah. And even if you have an opinion, the author talks about staying in your lane. And I think there's just so many places, and I'll let you describe this, but leading into that, there's so many places where we are given the opportunity to reflect and use wisdom to decide if this is an appropriate moment to respond, and then how should I respond. And that, we've talked about this a lot, but that is missing so often in our discourse, not just within the church, but in the current partisan political environment in the United States. The pause button is not there.
The pause button, yeah. Everything's about reaction and in emotional responses. And again, letting either, someone you listen to, on the internet or in person or on the TV, let them do the thinking for you when it's not, their thinking may not be accurate. I really want to go to the COVID thing and a little more bluntly, is the argument at the time was that the government is telling us that we cannot worship together, that we cannot assemble, and that we're breaking, the Hebrews 10, 28 and 29, forsake the meeting together, but we're called to get together to worship. But the problem is they didn't actually say that, because you can still, this is fellowship. What we're currently doing, it's not, and that's what Scripture was telling us. You didn't have to do it in large groups in a particular building.
Or the format. Yeah, they could not have ever imagined the capabilities that we have to have community.
Right. And so it's like you're assuming a straight line morality here, or command, that they're specifically telling us to break God's commandment. No, they're actually not. You think they are, but they're not. And so it's like, okay, so if that's not an actual breaking of the command, what would be breaking the command is to not see other Christians at all and and talking to them at all. But that was a personal choice. There was always opportunity for other Christians to talk to each other, to get together in small groups or to talk about it on the phone. I mean, so the government, there was all this thinking that said, we must not obey these commands of the government to not assemble because they're telling us to sin. But you weren't breaking God's commands. They weren't. So then it kicks in. Okay, so the other complicated issues. So like, okay, are we being rebellious? Hmm. Are we concerned about other people? And then the question, because I'm rambling here, but I think all this is relevant,
Yeah.
is do you rebel against an authority in your life, whether it's a teacher or a parent or a boss or the government, simply because you don't like what they've said, that you think they're wrong? Let's say the government, you were I'm ranting, and I'm sorry, you're just gonna have to put up with me. Even if you were in the position of, you were convinced that the government was lying and wrong. Okay, so that doesn't mean you have to just you get to disobey them just because they're wrong. Just because you were convinced that the shots were wrong and the masks were not helpful. I mean, and we can have a conversation about whether that's true or not. But the straight moral line is, but you still have to obey an authority, even if you don't agree with them, unless they tell you to do something that is against God's will. But they're not doing that, even though you think they are. But that's that kind of deep thinking.
Yeah.
You have to do.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard. I see, when I see people that I love get on social media and on either side and throw up their arms in outrage, I worry that that becomes their identity to a greater extent than them as a good citizen of the world, a Christian, whatever, right? Their identity, and I really, there's somebody used to go to our church. They've moved out of state, and their whole feed is political in nature. And it's like, and maybe that's their identity now. I'm not using the gender specifically because I don't want to call out anybody.
That's the point, though, is what is your identity? And if you listen to what they say online, if you just look at that, it's like, well, you're telling me your identity is more centered in politics than it is Jesus.
Yeah.
I mean, years ago there was this thing, is there enough evidence in your life that if you were taken to court, you would be convicted of being a Christian?
Mm.
That's a great point. Okay, so what would the pardonance of the evidence of your online discourse, or what your primary conversations are with other people in your life, that you're more of a political person than you are a Christian? That's a great question. What is your identity?
Yeah.
What do you talk about?
Disc golf.
It's like, what are your priorities in your life? Well, look at your checkbook.
Yeah.
Right?
And
you spend your time on.
In the case of this individual that I mentioned, I know their heart, and I know that Jesus is number one. I think that fear is takes over. You know, that in order to protect my kids, to protect the world, to protect them from this messy world that we're in, that I have to adopt this additional identity.
Yeah. Do you think a good way of looking at it is just to see such people, such we can be there too, they're just manipulated.
Yeah. 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 And
not manipulated to make that what's most important because of whatever reason, fear, whatever.
Yes. Yeah. Sometimes we are so desirous of an outcome, and this is all of us really, that the first bit of information that supports our desired outcome is the one that we're going to believe. We've seen this, and I can't remember what they call it, but you could present somebody with factual evidence of, like, this is the absolute truth. And they'll believe it until the next person comes along that they view as a somewhat reliable source, tells them something that aligns with what they wanted to believe, and then they'll abandon the truth and fall right back in to that other way of thinking.
And that should not be a shock for us Christians and believers, is because for us, it's so clearly obvious that Jesus is resurrected from the dead. However, and we look at those who don't believe in him like, how can you not see it? This is why.
Yeah. This is
sometimes information, sometimes it, but sometimes it's like, yeah, but it's uncomfortable to think about that.
right. I was thinking before we came on, one of the things I was thinking about is how we engage with people outside the faith, and trying to kind of share our perspective on things. So, when we get to a straight line and we want to talk to somebody that we care about why we believe it's a straight line, that we have to do the difficult task of putting ourselves in their shoes. And I say it difficult. The analogy that came to my mind is, what would it take for you to be convinced, if a Jehovah's Witness came to your door, that what they are telling you is absolutely true? And
Oof.
right, can you imagine anything that they would say or do that could sway you?
No.
And that's how a lot of non-Christians feel. There's like nothing you can say that's going to convince them that you're on the right side. It's through your actions, it's through your love, it's through the way you move through the world.
Yeah, there's nothing. There's no, I mean, well, yeah.
Well, I'll tell you, in my life, many years ago, I dated a Jehovah's Witness. And I cared enough about her that when she said there's no way for us to be together unless you come to this faith, I said, let me, give me the book and I'll read it and I'll let you know if we can move forward. And obviously we didn't. But, I wanted to put myself in the shoes of this person that I cared very much for. And I understood where she was coming from and why she believed the way she believed. And I knew, I couldn't go there.
But put that over the, those, put it in some of the, put the same thing for other issues, such as, you're convinced that abortion is wrong. Okay. What could a person who's pro-abortion say to you to convince you that they're right? It's like, okay. Now, whether that's just policy. The other thing to think about is make sure you get your facts straight. Right, because sometimes you're arguing for a position, but it's based on facts that you haven't made sure are right.
Seed planted in shallow.
Yeah, it's like, because especially with something like policy, but there's also, we Christians, I don't think we should take as much strong a stand on a lot of policies that we do.
I agree. Yeah.
And I'm very aware of that as a pastor, but I don't know that that's just as, I don't think it's just us pastors that need to be thinking like that.
No.
I don't know. We've probably talked this chapter to death, haven't we? Is there anything else we need to say?
I just want to reinforce, that we love you folks, and we're so grateful for the time that you take. And also, man, don't be afraid to adopt a pause button, please.
It's tough.
Yeah.
It's especially these days. Try to get your emotions out of it. Try to get your facts straight, and be careful that what you're just so absolutely sure about.
Yeah.
So
hard stuff.
All right. Well, until next time. Hey, maybe we'll get together next week.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
Hey, let's do it in a row.
Yeah, we can do it.
All right. God bless everybody. We'll see you guys on on Sunday.
All right. Take care, folks.
Bye bye.